The Pittsburgh Steelers have been named landing spots for literally every quarterback on the market, every quarterback that could be on the market, every trade, every signing, every draft pick, everything. So let's talk about the most unrealistic ones, the ones that we could scratch off immediately before the NFL Combine and free agency. What's going on, everybody? I'm Noah Strackbine. Thank you for jumping on to Steelers to Go, your daily to-go cup of Pittsburgh Steelers news and analysis. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. As I said, the Pittsburgh Steelers have been named landing spots for literally every single available or could be or should be available quarterback. And I mean every single one of them. Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Kirk Cousins, Ryan Tannehill, Mason Rudolph, Gardner Minshew, Jacoby Brissett, you name it. The Pittsburgh Steelers have been linked to it some which way or another. And we have talked about every single one of them, and we will continue to talk about every single one of them. And some of them, I think, are very realistic. You look at circumstance and contracts and trade negotiations and NFL draft and whatever. Some of them make sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Some of them make a ton of sense. More sense than I think what the Pittsburgh Steelers want to believe. Some of them, though, some of them don't make any sense at all. Some of them are wild. And I think it's a really good idea to sit down and go through the most outrageous names the Pittsburgh Steelers could sign and the names that you just look at and you go, look it, that's not going to happen. I don't know why we're talking about that happening. I don't know why anybody would believe the Pittsburgh Steelers would be interested or that why that makes sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers in the first place. And to clarify more realistically who's available, we need to first identify who is not available or who the Pittsburgh Steelers wouldn't even sniff. And I think there's at least 3 or 4 of them that you look at in this list and you say, yeah, that's not going to happen. Let's start with the big one, the easy one, the most what are you talking about take that you could possibly have. That is Jimmy Garoppolo. And I talked about him yesterday and I laughed, and then we talked about him on the pod and we laughed. And every time you bring this guy up and you mention his name with the Pittsburgh Steelers, you just got to think, why? How does that work? What does that fit? How does that work out for the Pittsburgh Steelers? How does that make any sense for what they are trying to accomplish or the plan that they have very clearly laid out for us in the first place? At bare minimum, the Pittsburgh Steelers are looking for competition when it comes to Kenny Pickett. They might not be looking to hand him a job, and they might be looking to get somebody who they believe can take them to a Super Bowl. Both of those realistic possibilities. What they are not looking for is for nobody to come in here and compete with Kenny Pickett and for Kenny Pickett just to be handed a job and saying, hey, it's yours. That's it. And then on top of that, not have a backup quarterback for 2 weeks in the NFL season. How does that make any sense? It doesn't. If this was a team who had a Mitch Trubisky, who had a Mason Rudolph, who had a young quarterback somewhere that you were like, okay, look, maybe that could be a number 2. He's not quite ready to be a backup, but for 2 games, cool. If Kenny Pickett was a guy that you were very headstrong for, that you looked at as a Brock Purdy or whoever and said, this guy might not be it just yet, but we believe that he could be it. Jimmy Garoppolo makes a ton of sense. That's a guy that you want as a backup. That's a guy who, when stepping into a situation, has always proven he can be a winner. Makes a ton of sense for a ton of teams. Doesn't make sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That one is hands down the most wild take you could possibly come up with, just because the Steelers are not interested in not giving Kenny Pickett any competition, to just hand him the job and to say, all right, well, year 3, this is it. And we don't even have a viable backup because Jimmy Garoppolo is suspended for 2 games. And I'm sorry, but the Steelers don't operate that way. You could say, oh, well, when he returns. Oh, well, if Kenny isn't good enough, at least you have another option, another veteran who's a proven winner during the season. That's not how the Steelers operate. They're not looking at training camp as just a small sample size and then saying, okay, once the season starts, then we'll make the decision on if Kenny Pickett's good or not. They want training camp to be the time where they say, this is our QB1, this is our QB2, and maybe it won't be Kenny Pickett. Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't make any sense. None. It's actually laughable to bring his name up when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Second on top of that one is probably Bo Nix. That is a guy that has been tossed out there so many times as the Steelers' first-round draft pick. A guy that, ESPN's Field Yates put it on his first mock draft. Bo Nix, 20th pick in the draft. What? Why? Doesn't make any sense. Bo Nix is a dude who's coming out of college, who has comparisons to Kenny Pickett, who has issues when it comes to his arm, and really is viewed as a guy who kind of carried himself because he was late into college. He spent so many years in college football at the NCAA level that it boosted his draft stock. Reminds you exactly of Kenny Pickett. It reminds you exactly the guy that they're already dealing with. The Steelers are not, first of all, the Steelers are not using a first-round draft pick on a quarterback. That is ridiculous just to think in its own. It's not going to happen. They're, at bare minimum, looking for Kenny Pickett to at least get an opportunity and or to go win a Super Bowl. And guess what a rookie quarterback doesn't do for you? Go and win you a Super Bowl. It's never happened. It's never going to happen. The Pittsburgh Steelers are not looking at the 20th pick in the draft and saying, we're going to find our guy there. That's going to be our year one Super Bowl winner. No questions asked. He is going to go defeat the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers and the Philadelphia Eagles and the Detroit Lions and the Lamar Jacksons and Joe Burrows and Justin Herberts and all these guys. No, it's not going to happen. You're not looking at a first-round quarterback with the 20th pick in the draft. You're not looking at a guy who's going to come in here and immediately have to be granted the starting job and or compete with Kenny Pickett, and you have two guys that you don't feel confident either one of them can go out and win you multiple playoff games. That one's just not going to happen. You could look at Bo Nix. You could look at any first-round quarterback. Unless a guy like J.J. McCarthy slides to 20, then you could at least consider it, but I don't think the Steelers would. I think at that point, they would shop that pick, find somebody who's close enough in that realm that wants to come up and make a move and hand them a boatload of picks and them to say, sounds good, here's our guy. Take J.J. McCarthy. We'll take your second-round pick and your fourth-round pick, and we'll move on. Bo Nix ain't going to happen. He's not coming to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And really, you could rule out anybody in the first round, probably the second round, depending on how free agency goes, but I would guess the second round as well of the NFL draft for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Go get some offensive linemen. Go get a corner. Go get an inside linebacker. Go get a safety. Go get a defensive lineman. You can name a boatload of them before you get to a guy who you're going to take a risk on and say, you want to know who are really good second-round quarterbacks, except for when they're not. That's all I'm saying. You keep going down the list and name guys like Gardner Minshew and Jacoby Brissett, who people want to say are realistic options, who want to say are on the list. I don't believe they are. I don't think either of them fit what the Steelers are looking for. I view both of them as very laid-back options, very bar is low options for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think there's some splash coming this season. I think that if it's Mason Rudolph, that's some splash. I think that if it's Justin Fields, that's a ton of splash. If it's Kirk Cousins, Russell Wilson, that's some splash. I think even Ryan Tannehill brings you some splash. I don't believe Jacoby Brissett does. I think you could go get any backup quarterback who's a veteran, who has some starting experience, but hasn't been proven to be a winner in the National Football League, who hasn't proven to be a long-term starter in the National Football League. That's what both Gardner Minshew and Jacoby Brissett bring to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if I had to list them off, I think Gardner Minshew makes more sense than Jacoby Brissett, but why would Gardner Minshew want to leave Indianapolis? That doesn't make sense either. Jacoby Brissett's a name that gets tossed out there time and time again, and everybody wants to say, oh, that's a guy that the Steelers could look at. I don't think anybody in Pittsburgh is sitting around going, Jacoby Brissett's going to win us a Super Bowl in 2024. Jacoby Brissett's going to beat out Kenny Pickett in 2024. It's like the Jimmy G thing. You're looking at it and you're going, no. Ryan Tannehill makes sense just because he has winning experience in the NFL. He's a long-term starter in the NFL. He's got the connection with Arthur Smith. He's really your only veteran and probably isn't a starting quarterback anymore, but could be on a roster option for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Unless they don't land anybody else. Then at that point, you're looking elsewhere. But when it comes to those guys, when it comes to the Jacoby Brissett baseline options, it doesn't make any sense. And as crazy as it sounds, Russell Wilson, Kirk Cousins, Justin Fields, all those guys make much more realistic options than the 3-4 guys that I've just named. They're just not going to happen. And you could rule them off and cross them off your Steelers checklist as options for the Steelers quarterback position this season because, quite frankly, I don't think they're even on the big board. And I don't think they're going to be considered by the Pittsburgh Steelers at any moment during this offseason. And you got a much bigger chance to go make some wild trade or to go make some wild splash signing if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers or a Pittsburgh Steelers fan than sitting around holding your breath thinking Jacoby Brissett or Jimmy G or Bo Nix is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback in 2024.